Hey guys, and welcome back to the Thoughtful Therapist podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jimmy Sclater, and today we're on episode 14. Would we still believe we were right even without enemies? Now, everything I'm about to say is something that I've been kind of trying to challenge in myself first for many years now. And if for some reason my ideas don't hold up, I sure hope I notice. And if you do, let me know. Have you ever been having a really good conversation with someone? I don't mean like a debate, but just two people exploring an idea. You're asking each other questions, and it feels like you're both trying really hard to understand one another. Or maybe they have an interesting point that you haven't thought of. And then you say something. Maybe you phrased it poorly. Maybe it's taken out of context. Or maybe it brushes up against one of the other person's deeply held beliefs. And almost instantly, the conversation changes. You really can almost watch it happen. The curiosity disappears in the other person, and you can feel their walls go up, and they start to make assumptions. And suddenly it doesn't really feel like you're talking with each other anymore as much as you are talking at each other. Or maybe you've been on the receiving side of this. I mean, I know I have. Someone says something that hits one of my values, and before I even realize what's happening, I've already started building like a rebuttal instead of trying to understand what they actually meant. That's something I've been thinking a lot about lately. Like, why does that happen so quickly? What is it about specific ideas that make us stop exploring and just get into that defensive posture? And that kind of led me to a question I haven't really been able to shake, which is, would we believe we were right if we didn't have enemies? And I wonder if one of the greatest obstacles to thoughtful thinking isn't ignorance or a lack of knowledge, but maybe it's the moment where another person or ideal becomes the enemy. I mean, how quickly clarity turns into absolute contempt, and how safe that can make you feel in your idea. Because when we have enemies, it seems like we collapse the complexity of the conversation. Once someone is the problem, we kind of stop being curious. And I'm not saying people are necessarily wrong for doing this. I think that we all do it. It's human. But it comes at a cost. Right? And I know I've talked quite a bit about responsibility before, but it kind of says something like, I choose how I respond. But when hostility takes over, it kind of says something more like someone else must change for me to be okay. It seems like you can hold firm values without needing an enemy to justify them. Because like there's a lot. The cost is high. Right? I watch people decide to lose people instead of understanding them. Mistake moral clarity for moral superiority. Speaking at rather than with, as I stated earlier. I don't know. I think there's a kind of strength that doesn't require dominance. I mean, thinking can survive disagreement after all. It tends to be slower. And it's certainly way less rewarding online. But, this sort of thinking is harder emotionally. But I think it's kind of how you preserve dignity. And as always, my intention here is not to have any sort of judgment or prescribed advice. I don't have a diagnosis or a moral grandstanding of any kind. They're just thoughts. And this is kind of how I'm trying to live. Just kind of trying to know how. This is how I'm trying to think. I hope that you sit with me while I work this out. Maybe enjoy yourself. Even though I will be doing it imperfectly. I'm sure. So this conversation, like many that I have, might be uncomfortable at moments, and if you need to pause or return later, you're welcome to do so, of course. The goal here is never agreement. It's just thinking. So let's take this one thought at a time. I want to start today with an idea that's well supported in psychological research, even if the exact example I'm about to use is more illustrative than tied to a specific study to start with. But across decades of work in framing effects, moral psychology, political cognition, researchers have always shown something both really simple and for me, it's unsettling. The language used to describe an issue often shapes people's moral reactions as much as the issue itself. Same data, same outcomes, different worlds, different conclusions. You can see this in framing research going back to, I'm going to butcher this name, I'm so sorry, Kahneman and Tversky and Jonathan Haidt's work on moral foundations as well, and in more recent studies that show how policy language activates identity more than deliberation and conversation. So if you're curious, those are pretty good places to start, and I'm going to have them linked in the description of this video. Here's an example that captures that pattern pretty well. So imagine a public policy that's aimed at reducing pollution in local waterways. Okay. So when that policy is framed as part of a green initiative, support often splits quickly along these ideological lines. People don't just evaluate the proposal, they recognize and focus on the language. And once the language is recognized, the conclusion often arrives fully formed already. But if you were to take that same policy and the same goals and frame them simply as we want clean drinking water, or we want to protect our children's health, resistance often softens drastically. Support becomes much heavier, not because the facts have changed, but because the moral story did. Nothing substantive shifted at all. Only the frame. And what matters here isn't which version is right. What matters is what that reveals about us. We really like to believe that our positions come from careful reasoning, from principles we've examined and chosen, and sometimes they do. But a great deal of what we experience as conviction is actually recognition. A word can signal identity. A phrase signals threat or belonging. And before we've had time to think, we've already taken a side. Most of us don't even notice this is happening, or maybe even think it's okay. And we experience that conclusion as obvious. I feel like we're starting to experience disagreement as like ignorance or bad faith on part of the other person. And we experience certainty as moral clarity. But research in this area suggests something much more humbling. Our moral intuitions are often activated first and then explained later. Language doesn't just communicate ideas, it recruits loyalty. And once that loyalty is engaged, curiosity drops off fast. And this is where this idea began for me. This is where the idea of enemies begin. Not really like with hatred, but with certainty that feels so self-evident that the other person must be wrong. with stories that feel complete before they've been examined, with the belief that any reasonable person would see it the same way as I do, if only they were honest or good or smart. In my own clinical work, I see the same mechanism like everywhere. Couples lock into opposing narratives. Families stop listening because each word is translated through threat. Individuals who become enemies to parts of themselves because a single story has taken over their whole identity. So I feel like the question isn't whether framing influences us, because it does. But the real question seems like, what am I meant to do after I notice that? Now, this idea of thinking without enemies doesn't mean that we abandon our convictions, but maybe more like holding conviction with enough humility to ask, well, what story or part of the story am I actually responding to? And what might I be missing? Right? It means that recognizing that I'm being influenced by language is not something that makes me weak, but pretending that I'm immune to that just might make me weak. So as we move through this episode, I want to invite a different posture, not suspicion or defensiveness, just attention. When agreement comes easily, notice that. When resistance shows up fast, notice that too. Not to judge it, just to see it, understand it, acknowledge it. Because the moment we stop asking how we came to believe what we do is the moment we're not really thinking anymore, and it's just identity. And identity is tricky because when it feels threatened, it does not look for truth. It really just looks for our enemies. And that's the terrain we're stepping into today. Now, I really want to be clear about what I'm leaning on here. I'm not drawing from one perfect study that makes this grand claim that comes, from any, magical text. But it draws from a body of research, starting with Kahneman and Tversky on framing effects, and moving through moral psychology work by Jonathan Haidt, and into political science research showing that language tends to activate that idea of identity and values much more so than it changes minds. Now, none of them tell us what to believe or what's right or wrong, but it kind of does explain why people get so certain about specific things so quickly. And like I said, I've put many peer-reviewed articles in the show notes just to help kind of show how I'm thinking about this. So, read them, decide for yourself. But once we see how language shapes beliefs, it becomes hard not to notice the environment that we're thinking inside of. Today, most of our ideas don't form in a soft reflection of information. They kind of form in feeds and headlines and comment sections on Twitter and clips designed to grab attention faster than we can even evaluate what we've seen. And it's not accidental that that's the case. But modern media, especially social media, is built around algorithms whose primary job is not truth or understanding or coherence, it's engagement. How long will you sit and watch this? Time on screen, emotional activation. And the strongest driver of engagement by far is not curiosity. It's some level of talking about something you're already certain about mixed with some level of outrage. And don't get it twisted. These media companies, social media companies, and I even feel like podcasters today are paying people big money to figure out those algorithms and to figure out how to keep people more engaged and make it more addictive, less thought-inducing, and more just almost primal emotions. As the media moved away from print and broadcasting into the digital attention-based economy, you can see how these pressures began shaping legacy outlets. Many journalists and media executives have openly acknowledged that the incentives have changed. It's much more about speed, clicks, shareability, and those things have started to matter much more than deliberation and careful thought. Not because like reporters stopped caring about accuracy, although like maybe they did, but because the system they're working in rewards reaction over intelligence gathering. And in that environment, nuance really struggles to survive. I mean, long form thinking loses ground to immediacy like every time. And those stories that provoke emotion, especially anger and moral certainty, travel further and faster than those that invite patience or reflection. Anger keeps us scrolling. Fear keeps us clicking. Moral certainty keeps us sharing. Manipulation and responsibility add to this reality of bot networks. Coordinated troll campaigns, foreign influence operations, many of which are now well documented. These systems don't usually invite beliefs from nothing, or these systems don't normally invent beliefs from nothing. They amplify what already divides us. Like I said, they have a lot of people that they give a lot of money to do research to figure this stuff out. These companies take existing fears, existing grievances, existing identities, and turn up the volume to 100. And what matters most here isn't whether or not you've been influenced, because I think that's the wrong question. I think the more honest question is whether any of us could realistically avoid being influenced in this environment that is literally specifically designed to bypass personal reflection. And acknowledging these dynamics doesn't mean we replace one set of enemies with another. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying like the media is evil. It's really easy in a conversation like this for the mind to kind of slip back into that, like, oh, there's a different enemy, us versus them. That's not my intention, right? I'm not now like, oh, we have to go to war with the manipulators and the platforms or the bad actors and put them in a new villain role in our lives. We have to watch out for that temptation in ourselves because that's just not very useful. The point isn't to find that new enemy. It's to see the environment clearly so we can take responsibility with what we do inside of it. And there's yet another uncomfortable layer to this. Research on belief formation and persistence shows that once people adopt a belief, especially one tied to their identity, factual evidence alone almost never changes it. Even when contradictory information is presented clearly, scientifically, in good faith, people still tend to reinterpret it, dismiss it, or absorb it in a way that preserves the original conclusion they got from the original piece of misinformation. Now, this isn't because people are stupid. It's not because they're malicious, but it's because belief, once formed, becomes part of the self. To change it almost feels like you're giving something up. It can be kind of humiliating. Sometimes it feels like a betrayal to the people around you. Not just of like position, but of like a betrayal of almost who we thought we were when we thought the way that we thought with the original piece of information. So when we're flooded with information that confirms our side, flatters our certainty, and portrays disagreement as danger or stupidity, something like really obviously predictable happens. Those beliefs start to harden, ideas become much less complex, and we start to withdraw psychologically at the great cost to ourselves. Start losing family members and friends. Some people start losing jobs, freedoms, abilities. When new information arrives, and it almost always does, someone with an open mind you would expect to adapt, but we often don't. And modern media really depends on that. And again, I think the podcast realm does now as well. So what's said and how it's said matters almost just as much as the information itself. It used to be like, follow us as we continue to uncover the truth. Right? That's what like a legacy media outlet would say. And now it's much more often like, follow us as we expose these immoral villains and as they do this horrendous thing. The goal is not understanding. It's trying to create a series of hammers looking for nails. And so with that analogy, it comes back to my original premise. If there were no nails, would it still be appropriate to be a hammer? And this is where this idea of being able to think the way that a lot of people do in terms of their ideologies without enemies becomes really difficult and maybe most necessary. Because in a system that rewards outrage, enemies are profitable. In a system that rewards certainty, doubt looks and feels like weakness. And in a system that monetizes attention, slowing down enough to think about something can feel almost irresponsible. We don't have time to do that. There's no time to be kind and thoughtful and conscientious. So, I don't know. Holding nuance, steel manning the other side, resisting the pull towards certainty is psychologically expensive. This thing that I'm suggesting takes real effort. And bad actors, whether ideological extremists, grifters, coordinated operators, they'll routinely exploit this asymmetry and this want to kind of stray from your side. They'll weaponize your good faith attempts at understanding information while refusing to accept any level of reciprocity. But here's the part I really don't want to lose sight of here. Acknowledging manipulation doesn't absolve us of the things that we know we should be doing. So yes, algorithms shape what we see. Sure. Yeah, actors with bad intentions exploit those systems to the nth degree. Yes, lies spread faster than their corrections. But still, it's up to us to figure out how we're going to respond once we notice all of that. No, I'm not saying that we need to always be able to spot falsehood immediately. But I think it means that we need to take seriously the conditions under which we're forming the beliefs that guide our lives. It kind of means resisting that urge to outsource our thinking to whatever confirms us in the most efficient way. Which again, the algorithms are literally meant to do. And also a lot of the AI systems will do that too. That means asking harder questions than, is this true? But maybe why does it feel so satisfying to believe that it is true? Or who is benefiting from the fact that not only am I upset about this now, but I'm going to continue to be upset about this and maybe even behave in upset ways about this? Maybe it's important to ask a question what would it cost me socially, interpersonally, if I was wrong? And am I protecting this idea because it's true, or because I've decided that it's mine? These are not the questions that the algorithms will ask you for. They're the questions we have to learn how to ask. Or we don't. And if we don't, something, I don't know, it seems subtle, but I'm not sure how subtle it really is, but it's dangerous happens, right? We stop relating to other people. We remove other people's value. We stop valuing them. We start believing that they're not capable of cogent thinking. We demonize their morality, and we stop having any level of empathy for them at all. And it creates this distorted environment that's almost impossible to navigate. And the only relation we have now to these people is as a threat, as an obstacle, or an enemy. That shift doesn't like require hatred, but it requires like a lack of honest humility. It seems like, anyway. I don't know. The ideas we've been discussing today in this episode lead to some deep and serious questions. Not just about how people are thinking, but about how I am. Right, and this is kind of a big question, but I think it's necessary. But like, let's start with our own side. Let's say that I'm evaluating my team, right? This us part of the us versus them conversation. Do I agree with my team 100% of the time? 90%? 85%? Even though, Tommy puts that stink on that little bit that you don't really like, so maybe it's more like 70%. But if we're all the way at 100%, or kind of anywhere close, we're probably dealing much closer to identity than to your own personal thought processes. And so maybe it's important to start to really focus on the parts and places that you don't agree with your team. Acknowledge them. Admit that there are faults on your own side. And then on the flip side of the coin, spend some real time with the other side's points. Are there parts of them that make any level of sense? I wouldn't assume they make zero sense. But like, what actually holds water? What makes sense? Try to name them authentically. And ask yourself, have I actually been listening to this person? Or just guarding my position knowing that I'm superior? What percentage of the other side do I really think belongs in the enemy category? Because like in the political spectrum right now, it's all Republicans or all Democrats. It seems like, or at least from the loudest voices out there. And there's no way that that's true. And if my response is all of them, all X or Y, is really problematic thinking. And if that's the case, I really need to think through what that implies for my life, my loved ones, or like society in general. Like, are we actually understanding what social justice means? Or what prejudice looks like? What do they do that's similar to us? Because it's not nothing. And sit with it. I've watched all sides of the political spectrum hand down moral judgments. I've seen both sides engage in cancel culture. I've seen both sides lie, pass over the truth. Now, okay, so let's assume the research here is roughly accurate. On social media, significant numbers of accounts and polarized discussions are inauthentic. Sometimes as much as 20% or higher. And it's funny because the more heated the conversation, or the more edgy the topic or the post, it seems like the more likely it's an inauthentic bot. Right? So it seems to me like a lot of these inauthentic systems are responsible for a disproportionate share of posting and responding and commenting and posting and liking. And you add coordinated troll campaigns and foreign influence operations, and a meaningful portion of what we receive or react to online, it's not just misleading, it's literally manufactured. So it's so important, right? Like, how much of what I believe isn't just wrong, but intentionally designed to play on my fear and anger, do you think the other side experiences anything different than that? So, like, if I go out and act a fool based on my ideology, all I've done is proven a bunch of bots on the other side correct. And it's so wild because it seems to me that at the root of people, I really believe that most people's values align way more than the noise would have us believe. Outside of social media, even the language itself is designed to inflame across all the platforms. It can feel like we're just absolutely being played, used as tools. And it's funny. People likely won't even change their position, no matter what evidence follows. Even after this podcast, I wouldn't assume most people are going to drastically change their views. So then who's the enemy really? Is it them? Is it us? Both? I don't know. There's no blame here. I'm not attempting to blame anyone. There's no condemnation. But if enemies are literally being used to sell us our ideologies, are we not compromised in thought at the deepest level? If sowing discontent is the weapon against thinking, what is our response? I sure hope it isn't to continue funding the systems that profit from our division while we hate each other's teams and the coaches earn a wage from it. So when I ask it, who is the enemy? I want to be careful because I don't think the answer is another group of people. I think enemies are just basically what provide us an excuse to stop listening. Enemies are what makes certainty feel safer than understanding. That we don't have to be vulnerable and think. If something continuously pushes us towards outrage, towards the simplification of ideas, and especially complex ones, towards treating other human beings as obstacles instead of fellow thinkers, I think that's the thing that really deserves our suspicion. Not the fact that you disagree with a group of people. I don't know. For me, this doesn't end with withdrawal or cynicism, perhaps. It just ends with me needing to take on the challenge of the issue that I've put forth today. Now, I don't expect to agree with anyone. I don't expect to be neutral. And I don't expect to be right all the time either, because I'm often not. But I don't think I really have enemies in thought. But I have ideas that I haven't finished understanding yet. And changing them and working on them is really uncomfortable. And I don't always like it. And this idea in no way makes me morally superior in any way. I'm just trying to be accountable. I mean, I'm wrong a lot. And I kind of hope that I always am. Because I feel like every time I'm wrong, if and when I have the courage to admit it, because I'm human and that doesn't always happen, then I get to replace something weaker with an idea that's stronger. I don't know, maybe that's the point of this whole podcast. Maybe that's what thinking really is. It's not about defending ideas. It's about improving them. One conversation, one disagreement, one challenge. Then, as I always say, one thought at a time. But I do expect myself to listen before I label, to slow down when I feel angry and certain about almost anything, and recognizing that feeling that want or need to fight, it's intoxicating. And to resist the temptation to outsource my thinking to other systems and other people that profit from my anger is of paramount importance to me. So this is how I'm trying to live. This is how I'm trying to think. Not perfectly, not even necessarily consistently, but as honest as I can. You don't have to agree with any of this. You don't have to adopt this posture even. But I really hope that thinking this through has at least opened the door to help us notice where we're thinking or how we're thinking, even if it's just once. And if it did it just once, then this episode has done exactly what it was meant to do. Again, not to give answers, just to try to protect a space where thinking is still celebrated and possible. Thanks for thinking it through with me. I'm Dr. Jimmy Slaughter, the thoughtful therapist. And until next time, remember to take it one thought at a time. I'd like to give a really big shout out to Synergy Health Group. Through all the trials and tribulations of getting this podcast up and started, they've been there to support me. They offer some wonderful counseling services. They have a wonderful team of counselors who are ready, willing, and able to help. So give them a shout.